Richard Nixon promised to bring American involvement in the Vietnam War to an end. Along with his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, they came up with a plan called Vietnamization. This plan meant gradually bringing American troops back home while getting South Vietnamese forces to take on more of the fighting. Nixon wanted to make sure the U.S. left the war with its dignity intact, calling it peace with honor. By August 1969, the first 25,000 American troops had already come back home. Over the next 3 years, the number of U.S. troops in Vietnam dropped from over $500,000 to less than 25,000. But Nixon didn't want to just walk away and lose the war. As he was pulling American troops out, he ordered a huge bombing campaign on North Vietnam. He also told the military to drop bombs on Laos and Cambodia because those countries had Viet Cong bases. To gain backing for his war strategies, Nixon reached out to what he called the silent majority. These were regular Americans who quietly supported the president's plans. While many people did support Nixon, the war still caused a lot of division in the country. Then, in November 1969, Americans were shocked to hear about a terrible event. U.S. soldiers had killed over 100 unarmed Vietnamese people in a village called My Lai, and things got even more upsetting in April 1970 when Nixon said U.S. troops had gone into Cambodia to try to cut off supplies for the Viet Cong. This news led to massive protests on college campuses. At Kent State University in Ohio, a protest turned into a tragedy. The mayor called in the National Guard to calm things down, but some students started throwing rocks. The guards ended up shooting into the crowd, killing 4 students. Nixon's decision to invade Cambodia really hurt his popularity. Even Congress got mad because he hadn't told them about it first, so they took away some of his power to make war decisions on his own. Support for the war dropped even more in June 1971. That's when a former worker from the Defense Department leaked papers called the Pentagon Papers. These papers showed that previous presidents hadn't made any plans to pull out of Vietnam, which made a lot of people really mad. In 1972, there was a big presidential election, and Nixon wanted to get re-elected. He thought the key to winning again was to finally put an end to the Vietnam War. So, he turned to his advisor, Henry Kissinger, who was in charge of national security stuff. Kissinger started negotiating with the North Vietnamese to try to make a peace deal, and in October 1972, Kissinger said they were super close to making it happen. Then, just a month later, Nixon won the election and got another term as president. But even though they were close to peace, it didn't happen. South Vietnam didn't like the deal that was on the table, so the talks fell apart. Nixon's response was to launch a massive bombing campaign on the 2 biggest cities in North Vietnam. This became known as the Christmas bombings, and it was crazy. U.S. planes dropped like 100,000 bombs around Christmas time. After that, they got back to the peace talks, and in January 1973, they finally signed an agreement. By the end of March, all the American troops had left Vietnam, and it seemed like the war was finally over for America. But sadly, once America left, the peace didn't last long. North and South Vietnam started fighting again, and in April 1975, North Vietnamese troops took over the capital city of South Vietnam, Saigon. Soon after that, South Vietnam gave up and surrendered to the North. The Vietnam War was incredibly costly for both sides. Around 58,000 Americans lost their lives, and over 303,000 were wounded. The number of Vietnamese deaths was even more staggering, with over 2 million lives lost. When the soldiers returned home, many families were relieved to have their loved ones back, but the country wasn't very welcoming. Vietnam veterans often faced hostility from people who were still angry about the war. After the war, Southeast Asia continued to struggle with violence and instability. In South Vietnam, many people were imprisoned by the communists who took over. In Cambodia, a group called the Khmer Rouge seized power in 1975 and tried to turn the country into a society of farmers. But in the process, they killed lots of government officials and intellectuals, possibly as many as 1 million people. In the United States, the war led to some big changes in policy. They got rid of the draft, and in 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Act. This law said the president couldn't send troops into a foreign conflict without getting the okay from Congress first. On a broader level, the war made Americans less eager to get involved in wars in other countries, and it left a lot of people feeling like they couldn't trust their own government anymore.